Before we start the session, I propose the name of Comrade V. Ramesh, President All India Insurance Employees Association, as the president of this session.
Comrades, I second the proposal placed by Comrade Shrikant Mishra ji.
Now I request on your behalf the speaker of this session, eminent historian, Professor Dr. Indu Agnihotri from the Center for Women's Development Studies, New Delhi, to please come over to the dais. Comrade Indu Agnihotri. I would request the senior leaders of AIIEA, Comrade Amanullah Khan and Comrade K. Venugopal, to please come onto the dais. Yeah, over to Comrade President. Now, comrades, before Comrade President takes the mic, on behalf of all of you, I would like to welcome Dr. Indu Agnihotri, because she has been kind enough to come over here and have given her consent to address this session. So on all your behalf, I'd like to welcome him to this seminar.
Dr. Professor Indu Agnihotri ji and our senior leaders on the dais. And also we are very happy that Comrade Raghavulu has come. He is a PB member. He has come and greeted us on this occasion. We welcome him. He will be joining. This apart, comrades, this is being live streamed. Is going on across the country. Perhaps most of our comrades across the country will be watching this program. Now we are already running short of time. Before we start the session, I request Comrade Shrikant Mishra, General Secretary of All India Insurance Employees Association, to give a brief introduction of Dr. Agnihotri ji. Indu Agnihotri ji, Comrade Shrikant Mishra will come. She is a prominent historian. She is from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and the brief introduction will be the General Secretary of All India Insurance Employees Association. Then we resume our program. Comrade General Secretary.
Comrade President and my dear comrades, now we welcome all of you to this two-day important event, the National Seminar on the occasion of 75 years of Indian independence. Now, as you all are aware, the Secretariat of the AIIEA that met at Bhubaneswar on the 30th of April and 1st of May, it decided to organize a seminar. In fact, there was a lot of debate whether we should call it a trade union class or a seminar. But maybe because of the compulsion of the times that we live in, we decided we should call it a seminar rather than a trade union class. But then it had to be confined to the leadership of the zonal units, who virtually constitute the core of the leadership of the All India Insurance Employees Association all over the country. And then I think a few words as to why this was needed. Now, if you see the developments that have been taking place in the last couple of weeks particularly, the celebration of the 75 years of India's independence, or in official parlance, the so-called Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, virtually this is being reduced to a celebration of symbolisms. The times are such that we are being forced by the ruling class today to wear our patriotism on our sleeve, as it were. The size of the national flag that you hold, it determines or decides how patriotic you are. Then the number of flags that you use, that also decides how patriotic you are. But we know, as our forefathers, they played a glorious role in India's struggle for independence from the shackles of British colonialism, that the independence movement was not merely a struggle of symbolism. India's struggle for independence, that is probably the biggest mass movement that human society has ever seen. Cutting across class, caste, barriers of faith and ideology, the people of India, they forged a unity, and such a unity that it brought the mighty British Empire to its knees. And we must appreciate, we know, we are aware that the basic ethos of India's struggle for independence, it was democratic in nature. And this vision of a democratic, secular India, a civil libertarian society, this guided the freedom struggle of India. And our forefathers, they quoted enormous sacrifice, as a result of which India got independence from the shackles of British colonial power. And then we started our journey to build a society based on these lofty ideals of democracy, secularism, justice to all, freedom of expression and thought. And in all this, the question of civil liberty is found a prominent place. And then all these tenets, all these facets of the freedom struggle, they found a profound expression in the constitution that we gave unto ourselves soon after India became independent. And then in the process, during the course of the intense debate that was taking place during the course of our freedom struggle, there was also a lot of debate as to what should be the economic ideology once India attained her independence. And based on this intense debate and discussion, when the country got its independence, we decided to build a society, an egalitarian society, and try to give some benefits to the people of India. Even though the economic ideology was basically capitalist in nature, but then our economy, our society, it tried to model itself as a welfare state. And in this conception, the public sector was given a very important place so far as building a self-reliant India was concerned. But today, when we celebrate the 75th year of India's independence, we find that all the basic tenets of the freedom struggle, all the noble values of the freedom movement, and the basic premises on which the Constitution of India was framed, all these are being demolished. The ruling class, they are trying to destroy the constitutional framework. So much so, apart from all the attacks that have been taking place, there is a virulent attack on the concept of self-reliant India itself through a concerted attack on the concept of public sector as such. The unity of the people of India, which constituted the bedrock of the freedom struggle, that unity is now sought to be wrecked by invoking caste, creed, and religion. India's minorities, they are in a hopeless state. And open calls are being given for mass annihilation of India's religious minorities. our understanding is that celebration of 75 years of Indian independence, it doesn't merely mean celebration of the national flag or some symbols. We must espouse the cause. We must uphold the cause. We must uphold the values that constituted the bedrock of our movement for independence. And the working class of India, they have played a glorious role so far as the struggle for India's independence is concerned. And that forms the topic for the first session today. But our understanding is that when there is a concerted attack on the very idea of India itself, an attack on our unity, an attack on the very basis of our foundation, that is secularism, attack on democracy, and attack on the constitution, so much so that all the constitutional authorities are also under tremendous attack. How can we function as a trade union in this social order? Because we know that democratic rights are the mother of all rights. So naturally, the trade union rights also follow from the democratic rights enshrined in the Constitution. But when democracy itself is under attack, how can trade union rights remain safe? And when this is the position, the AIIEA Secretariat felt that probably there is a need today, as in the words of some eminent intellectuals, to refashion the very conception of India itself. Because today all the facets of our culture, our society, they are under tremendous attack. So we felt we should organize a 2-day national seminar where some of the eminent speakers of the country should be invited to place their views. We will have an opportunity to listen to them, have an opportunity to interact with them. We will try to improve upon our understanding so that we will contribute our might as a conscious section of the working class of India to this, further the process of the nation in the making, so that the very idea of India that was conceptualized during the course of the freedom struggle, that remains safe. And we are confident we have a galaxy of speakers amidst us. Yesterday, in fact, I was sharing with Comrade Ramesh. This is for the first time that all the 4 speakers that we invited, all of them are coming. And not that they are ordinary speakers. We feel the 4 speakers, Professor Dr. Indu Agnihotri, then Justice H.N. Nagamohan Das, then Professor G.N. Devi, and finally Comrade Sitaram Yechuri. All of them are men and women of uneven genius. And when we have men and women of uneven genius, naturally, they will contribute a lot to our movement through their deliberations during these 2 days. And so far as today's session is concerned, we are extremely happy, despite her busy schedule, Comrade Dr. Indu Agnihotri, I would prefer to call her comrade, because these 3 comrades, Comrade Sitaram Yechuri, naturally he is close to AIIEA. She is coming to AIIEA for the first time. So I feel guilty. When we sent mails on behalf of the AIIEA, the first mail I addressed as Sirs and Madam. And the reply that we received, all of them addressed as Comrade Mishra. So that shows the wavelength that we have amongst us. And Dr. Indu Agnihotri, as the president of AIIEA, told you, she has been an eminent historian. She did her master's from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her PhD also she got from the Jawaharlal Nehru University. And presently, she is working with the Center for Women's Development Studies, New Delhi. Even though basically her area of interest is women's development studies, but women naturally, they constitute a very large part of the working class movement of India. So naturally, the scope or the depth or the vision, that is very broad. So we requested her, women are workers, we are workers, why don't you come and please address our comrades, especially on the question of the working class and the contribution of the working class to the freedom movement of India at a time when the working class movement is being denigrated and we are being branded as the villains, as if we are antithetical to the very progress of the nation. So we are confident that with the kind of personality that she is, Comrade Indu Agnihotri, she will speak on the subject, she will enlighten us. Her presentation will be followed by an interactive session where the comrades can ask their questions and get their doubts clarified. So once again, before she takes the mic, on behalf of all of you, I welcome Comrade Indu Malhotra this session on behalf of all of my comrades. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you. Thank you, Comrade Mishra, and all on the dais. And thank you to the All India Insurance Employees Association for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be amongst comrades. As a teacher, I can tell you I have missed it a lot in my life. I have always found that the meetings that I attended and participated in as part of the organizations that I was associated with, they added more to my knowledge, they added more to my energy and enthusiasm than a lot of the academic activities that we were part of, because they are often very dry. They go into people flaunting their knowledge, but that knowledge does not always lead to something which contributes to change on the ground. The only thing that academics and teaching help you with is that you see young faces who bring a lot of energy, new ideas, new challenges. And as a teacher, I must, by the way, correct Comrade Mishra, I retired. I was the director of Center for Women's Development Studies, but I retired a few years ago. So thank you very much. It's also, I think it's an honor for all of us to be together to celebrate 75 years of Indian independence. The government of the day and the people who are in power may reduce it to a mockery. But I think for all of us, I think I can speak for all of us in this room, most probably, maybe one or two exceptions, all of us are fortunate that we never had to bow down to the Union Jack and to the flag of the British Empire ever in our lives. And I think we have a lot to thank for all our previous generations of people who fought to bring us to this situation that we never had to bow. We could always hold our head with pride to the Indian flag. We may have our differences. We may want to go beyond what is going on. But I think all of us are fortunate and we cherish that freedom. And that is why it is all the more important to have these kind of discussions, as Comrade Mishra said, because the fear and the threat to the values that freedom struggle posited, the values for which unnamed people, especially if we look at the number of people from the working class and the peasantry who laid down their lives, who actually lost their lives. Not just that they lost their careers and they lost their, they had to suffer and face the repression of the British Empire. But how many lost their lives who will never be named in all those annals of history that people from my species prepare? We know, we are aware that those names will never figure. And that is why I was very happy, I remember, that one of my teachers and a team of his students, even though I disagreed with him on many occasions, Professor Bipin Chandra, he actually undertook an oral history project where he went from town to town, city to city, different states of India, doing an oral history, trying to find out about the struggles on the ground, because no history book can cover so much. The kind of country we live in, its size, its scale, the diversity, it is not possible to cover any of that in any one book, or leave alone a lecture like this. But we need much more. We need much more, and why I'm saying that right now to you is, it is important for you all also to document your struggles, to put together the documents of your struggles. Because how will we know when this struggle was fought, who fought it, what were the demands, what was achieved? No history student, no history teacher, no team of historians can gather the vast information which is spread out in India. It is extremely important. It is extremely important for unions, for the trade unions to document their struggles, because otherwise this huge, long history, this rich history is going to be lost. And the more we have these kind of, symbolic gestures and symbolic statements from the top, from our country's, the highest authorities, the more the erasure, this sort of literally rubbing out of this long, rich history. And that is why I would say that while I'm very glad, I think that magazine, that issue you have brought out is very, very important. But I would be very happy also if you could put together a volume, even if it's a small issue, of some very important struggles that your organization has launched, because that will bring that history on record. So please do that if you can. It will be a very big contribution to the history of the trade union movement, and to the very topic that you have asked me to speak on, which is the history of the working class. Because no history of the working class can be written only from the top. It is not possible. It is all the initiatives on the ground from below which actually enrich that history. So I'm very happy. If you want some help, I'm willing, but I would say collect your posters. The posters convey the demand, the slogans. They will tell you in a sense how from 1950s to today you have plotted your own journey. So do that as, say, one of the things to do. So thank you very much, as I said, and I'm very glad to be here. Now, no lecture can cover the vast history of the working class in India and in India's freedom struggle. And there are actually not many books on it. There are scattered bits of research, and there is, of course, Dr. Sukomal Sen's book, which is, and all of you may have known him. I did not know him, although I used to see him because he was in Delhi in the 80s. I think he was in the parliament, so I used to see him sometimes crossing in the lift in where the Delhi party office used to be, so there. But I think it's important to discuss this, not only because it's always good for people of my profession to have written histories, but I think that history, when I used to go to class, every morning, I used to ask my student, "Aaj ka akhbar padha?" And they used to wonder, they used to say, "This teacher teaches us history, and why does she ask us to read the newspaper?" So I used to tell them the newspaper gives you news and stories which affect your life. And if you're not interested in that, how will I assume that you have any interest in history, which is like 1500 years ago, even 500 years? Why would you be? If you're not interested in events which are actually shaping your life, which are affecting your life on a daily basis, and you don't want to read the newspaper, then why history? Okay. So in my profession, we are acutely aware that the relevance of our profession lies in the fact that we can bring some knowledge, some facts, we can bring something to add to the discussion about our present lives. Otherwise, it's an academic discussion. Now, why would the Insurance Employees Association be interested in an academic discussion on the working classes history. We're interested in it because some things are going on, some things are happening which are either trying to distort or represent them very selectively, very selective uh, 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 body of facts is being brought to you, or there is actually a reversal also. And I think it is good to begin with also discussing when we are celebrating the freedom of this country, when we are talking about nation, nationality, nationhood, nationalism every day. I hope you don't mind if I mix it with a little bit of Hindi, or is that a problem? I don't know. I'm fluent. I've taught history in Hindi and in English for more than 25 years, so I can speak in both languages. मेरा कहना यह है कि आप एक बाइक पे तिरंगा झंडा लगा के आप सोच रहे आप it's a big nationalist act. Of course it is. We hold the flag in high esteem. But what are you doing to the nation? What is your idea of the nation? What is your idea of nationalism? And especially when that idea and that symbolism, as Comrade Mishra was saying, comes from people who never contributed in any way to this struggle. I will say it right at the beginning rather than leave it to the end. The people who are celebrating 75 years of freedom today have not contributed to the achievement of this freedom in any way. There is not any body of writing in the vast store of writing that the ideologues of that tendency, that political trend in India, which is any kind of a critique or disagreement or which enlightens us on why there was a freedom struggle in India. Because they never opposed the British. Never. Those who did for a while, one or two very prominent names, you hear their names on TV debates every day nowadays. One or two, for a while they opposed, they went back on their own record of opposing, pledged to the British that we will not indulge in these activities again, and after that lived up to that promise, that pledge that they have given to the British colonial government. So let us be clear. And when such people take up the slogan of nation, nationalism, we need to be very, very careful. We need to be extra careful, because what is the purpose with which they are doing? What does it mean to be a nationalist today? What is the meaning of that nationalism today? These are all questions which we need to think about. And they are serious questions, because these are, we all read the papers, as I said. We saw what was happening to Sri Lanka. Okay? Does it just happen just because there are one or two corrupt politicians? How has an island nation been reduced to this situation that a doctor says, I cannot go to my hospital to do my work, my professional work, because I have to walk. I cannot take my car out. There is no fuel. I cannot go to work to perform the operations, the surgeries that I have to do, because this is the state of my country. Now, Sri Lanka is not an exception. South Asia is literally sitting on a big tinderbox. And I think when we discuss what has been our history and our past, it would be good to remember how we are surrounded and we are living in times which are highly volatile, which can mean anything. The country can go in any which way, as we have seen in our neighboring country very recently, and that is still happening. It's not new. So when we talk about the freedom struggle, coming to the actual topic you have asked me to speak on, there are 4 or 5 things that we broadly look at. One is the context and the background of the freedom struggle. What were the issues? The whole experience of subjugation to colonial rule. Then in that is also what we call the context of industrialization in India. How it was different from, because industrialization was inevitable in a sense. But industrialization happened in England, in Europe, and in India. But was it the same? Was it the same kind of situation? Was it the same kind of process? What were the issues, the organizations that came up? What were the struggles? What was the response of the colonial British regime to it? And then what are the changes in the present context and in post independence India? Now, let's be very clear that I'm sure all of you studied some bit of history in school, so you would know what British rule meant for India. Broadly, we say 2-3 things when we talk about British rule as far as the economy is concerned. And the economic critique of imperialism was one of the first things that the early nationalists did. You know, they critiqued from Dadabhai Naoroji, Surendranath Banerjee, R.C. Dutt, they all critiqued the economic content of British policies to show how, while Britain was emerging as the most powerful industrial nation in the world, its wealth, the creation of its wealth, the creation and the basis of its power rested on the subjugation of the people in the colonies. And that this was not just a political subjugation, it was a political subjugation with the purpose of subordinating our economy. And as a very well known international scholar said, that while Britain was developing, its colonies like India were underdeveloping. So the underdevelopment of the Indian economy was as much a part of the development of the British Empire as the big empire on which the sun never set, because the sun was always rising in one or the other of its colonies. So the early nationalists really made a critique of the economic content of colonial policies, etc. And what is the actual meaning of the economic content? Actual meaning is that over 200-250 years of foreign rule, our agriculture was finished. It was impoverished to the ultimate extent that you could. And the peasantry was reduced to an absolute, what we call a situation of self-exploitation. So, and to begin with, there were no industries. There were very few industries. And the earlier history of industries, because it's not as if there was no production in India before the British came, we had a very rich, very, very rich artisanal industries, karkhanas, small workshops from medieval times. I mean, the historians of the world have noted how India had more cities and towns and more rich, flourishing cities and towns which focused around the artisanal and handicrafts industries than probably any other country in the world in the 16th, 17th century. So it was a rich country, okay? But this industrial artisanal production was finished. In India, in Indian history, when we read about it, we call it the process of deindustrialization, meaning whatever industries we had were smashed. And a process of deindustrialization happened. Why did deindustrialization happen? Because British industry had to prosper. Okay, you hear about Lancashire, Manchester, all the big industries in Europe. They obviously had to prosper. Their cotton goods had to come to India. They had to be sold in India. They had to be purchased by the people in India. Before that, the Indian weavers, the Indian weaving industries, the artisanal industries had to be smashed totally. And if you understand that, then you will understand why Gandhi said, spin khadi, to counter the foreign market that was being cultivated in India. But it's also very strange. I said agriculture was smashed. Agriculture was smashed selectively. So for instance, nowadays you might find it is very popular that we say don't eat wheat, gluten allergies, and what all, health food and all. My PhD is on agrarian change in Punjab and in colonial India. And when I was doing my PhD, I drew some tables. We're all very serious scholars, so I took almost 100 years of tables from the agricultural statistics of British India on the crops that were grown. And you will find that if I did an indexing of the tables, wheat, which was in double figures, went into triple, and the numbers went increasing and jowar, bajra, millets, oil seeds, everything was coming down. So wheat and cotton, two crops, were increasing. Why were wheat and cotton increasing? Wheat, because as they called it, Punjab was the granary of the world. British soldiers had to be fed all over the world. So wheat was being procured from India, so wheat had to be produced. Cotton had to be produced. You know why. There are actual British documents which say now we have lost the American colony after the American War of Independence. So we need cotton for our industries. Where will we get cotton? So Maharashtra, Western India, Punjab went heavily into producing cotton. So as we say that there was the traditional agricultural economy was ruined. What was brought in its place were crops and commodities which they needed. So first it was opium, then it was indigo, then it was wheat, then it was cotton. That's the thing. Now, in all this, the Indian peasantry is finished. And it is that ruined, impoverished peasantry which then comes into the selective industries that they set up. So, already the working class which is coming from a very, very impoverished section. So their capacity to struggle also, you have to understand. Nevertheless, despite all that, when post 1830s, 1850s in India, a lot of industry starts to come up. To begin with, it is, of course, industries which the British needed, railways, printing, these kind of industries, municipal workers, postmen, postal authorities, these are the things. And gradually, of course, some cotton ginning mills and local. So these industries begin to come up. And post 1857, massive revolt. We all saw. Why was that massive revolt? Because the peasantry in India was just absolutely fed up of their lives. And that is what emerged as the revolt of 1857. Most of us are taught these big names of this Rani, Jhansi Ki Rani and Bahadur Shah Zafar. Of course, they were symbolic leaders of the movement. But actually, the revolt was fought by the peasantry of India, and there is enough evidence, there is enough historical research on that. But it's finished. Now comes a new phase of colonial rule in India, which is new industries begin to come up. So replacing the old industries and a new working class. So two new classes come up post 1857. By the early part of the 20th century, you have these two new classes. Which are the two new classes which we see till today? So you see the capitalists, the industrialists, slow growth of Indian industry, and स्लो ग्रोथ ऑफ वर्किंग क्लास. गांव से आते हैं, अपना जात पात घर बार सब कुछ छोड़ के कुछ अपने साथ लेकर के शहरों में आते हैं. And they've tried to build new bonds over there, new forms of communities. Some are taken forcefully as indentured labor first to the plantations in India and to the plantations in the West Indies, Caribbean region and all, under absolute slave conditions. So while slavery across the world is, Britain comes under criticism, so slavery is technically abolished, but you need slaves to work the plantation. So then you take Indian indentured labor to the Caribbean and to all these places. So that is the history from which a working class begins to emerge. And mind you, don't think of the working class as only male. Even in the indentured labor, the British had a clause, 40% who were taken on the ships were women. And they were not women who were part of families, because वो वहाँ family नहीं बनाने जा रहे थे, उनको slavery चाहिए थी. So these were women who were capable of hard labor, who were unencumbered by the family needs. So they were single women, widows who were taken. When we think of the working class also, we don't realize how women were 40% of the Indian indentured labor taken to the colonies of Britain in other parts of India were women and who were not going as wives. Not at all. They were forbidden to be wives. Families were not allowed to be set up on the plantations for a long time because it wastes. It is a waste of human labor. We want slaves. We want bodies which can slave and toil in the plantations to produce the sugar. Okay? So that's the history. So similarly in India, and then of course you have all the new industries coming up. Interestingly, it is first only British capital. Okay, Indian capital begins to come up towards the end of the 19th century and then 20th century. 20th century, particularly when the wars happen, when the two world wars, and British economy is tied up with its own war needs, so they allow Indian industry to develop a little bit. And once the Indian industrialists come up, then of course they want more concessions from the British. Now from the 1890s, the British had a clause that Indian cotton industry, for instance, and Indian cotton industry is one of the first industries to come up, apart from the public sector, as you call it today, the railways and all that. Cotton, there was a 20% duty which had to be paid by Indian industry. Why was this duty there? This duty was so that when you import cloth from Britain, it is expensive. Now, if Indian cloth is cheaper, nobody is going to buy it. So the cost of production of Indian cotton had to be raised so that British cloth could be at competitive. So they called it a countervailing duty. And the Indian industrialists were fighting against it from the 1890s, saying, please remove this because this is raising our cost and our products are expensive, so we cannot compete in this market. Do you know how and when that duty is removed? 30-year demand of the Indian industrialists. It is removed when the Bombay textile workers went on long strike. At that time, that duty of the demand of the industrialists is met by the action of the working class. You understand? It is then, and the workers were on strike because their wages had been deducted. It is when that duty is removed that the industry restored the wage deduction for once. For once. Okay? You understand how the actions of the working class, because when you read about the freedom struggles, all the names, Purushottam Das, Ghanshyam Das, Birla, all the big names. Nobody is talking about these workers and you can imagine all of you who go on one-day strike, how much it involves, organizing a one-day strike. In the 1920s, the Indian working class went on 6-month-long strikes. How did they survive? How did they survive? You ask me. Huh? We know if we don't get our salaries 1 month, what happens? We know what repression means, okay? And today we all know what repression means. I mean, anyone, I have several friends who are sitting inside jails because of this, the kind of acts and bills we have in our country, the laws. So we know. But this was a working class which was just coming up. It was struggling for its basic needs. So what were the issues that came up? Wages, of course, low wages, amazingly low, amazing. Pittance, wage deductions, insecurity of jobs, working conditions, long working hours, even 12 hours is less. It could be 18 hours, including in the mines where women and children were working underground. Around 40% of the workforce in the underground sections of the mines were women and children. Because अभी भी जैसे होता है ना rat mines में वो बच्चों को भेज देते हैं वैसे. I mean, I'm sure you people know more about those conditions than I do. But that is, in fact, even after the ILO brought a law a convention on underground mines, etc., Indian industry refused to implement it till the depression came and they wanted to reduce production. Then they said, okay, we'll follow the ILO. So this kind of thing. So from the 1880s, we find that there are small sporadic struggles, but these are not seen as union-based activities. The political assertion of the working class we see from the time of the Swadeshi movement, that is early 20th century, around the partition of Bengal, 1905, 1907, huge turnout of the workers in Bengal, for instance. Amazing. And there are reports that the people, the middle classes also, the urban people, came out to feed the processionists. So remarkable unity of the Indian people. It's not just the kind of hype we see. If you'd call for a one-day strike, the whole national media will go against you, saying how this is huge anti-national activity, No, so the people of Bengal came out and fed, they gave support, all that. And that is also one of the first times that we see a political action by the working class. Direct political action. When Tilak first is arrested, so the working class, particularly in Bombay, goes on strike. When he's arrested and convicted for 6 years, so the working class organized a strike, a one-day strike for all the 6 years, meaning a 6-day strike opposing. So it's seen as a direct, very, very direct political action of the working class. Why is it important to remember that? Because sometimes I'm sure in your union also you have this discussion. ये तो हमारा डिमांड नहीं है ना? ना wage increase होना है, ना bonus का सवाल है, whatever. So why should we go on? Tilak is being arrested, so what? But the working class of India did not say that. They turned out on the streets, they really created havoc on the streets, and the police really gave it to them. Massive repression. Some reports say maybe more than 250 died. Thank you, comrade. More than 250 died and many more were injured, arrested, all that. That's the history of the working class. Similarly, when you see, for instance, in India, there's non-cooperation movement going on in the from 1919, 20, 21, 22, that period, after the Rowlatt Satyagraha and all that. What did the British, the British are past masters, like all ruling classes. इधर ध्यान ज़्यादा जा रहा है इसको बांटने के लिए, इधर राइट करा दो, उधर कुछ और करा दो. So the British thought of something very interesting. They thought, let us get the Prince of Wales to come to India and there will be all this huge tamasha. So all public attention will be diverted. Okay? That was, they thought, a master stroke. But the working class of India had another master stroke. They went on strike. When the Prince of Wales came to India, they went on strike to protest against the British. Now that's equally a political strike. You understand? So there are many, many occasions. You would have all heard about the Simon Commission. The Simon Commission boycott is well known. And the workers went on strike against the Simon Commission. They did not allow any of that official tamasha to be, projected as the big ceremonial thing that government of British India is giving us this huge concession. There is this commission to inquire into our demands, etc. The working class went on strike. And from 1920, all of you would know that the first formal national trade union is set up in 1920, the All India Trade Union Congress. Before that, we see unions. From after 1907 or so, we see unions, a lot of strike committees kind of activities, lots of strikes. The number of working days lost because of action by the working class keeps going up. The peak comes in from 1927 to 29 to begin with, but it is in 1920 that the All India Trade Union Congress is set up as the first formal big national level trade union. Now, when you say trade union, normally you would think, okay, again, all this economic activity, as we say, economism in the unions. But no, who is the first president of the trade union AITUC? It is Lajpat Rai. And Lajpat Rai makes a very clear statement. If I can find it in my notes, I will give it to you. He makes a very clear statement linking trade union activity with capitalism and imperialism. Okay? His presidential speech in the AITUC conference very categorically makes a reference to imperialism and to capitalism, saying how these two together act militantly against the rights of the working class. And it's there, it's often quoted. What we find is from the time of the Swadeshi movement, the Indian working class comes in touch with what we call the nationalist leaders. It also establishes a direct bond with the political context of the agitations going on. It also makes its own presence felt in this period. And it goes beyond what we call agitations around only the economic demands to also the political context in which their lives and their struggles are being. So there is a marking out of both industry, industrial capitalism, and of the British colonial state and imperialism. Now, why do we say imperialism? Let's look at it. I mean, I think when we are discussing nationalism today, it is very important to understand what do we mean by imperialism. It's not just an empty slogan. I explained to you that there was a context in which policies, but it is equally important today. Because today, when you're hearing about nationalism, क्या है, आप बहुत सुनते होंगे foreigners. Who is a foreigner? Who is a foreigner? We need to know that. The freedom struggle was not only against foreign rule, first. And the left in India and historians of India have been very clear it was a struggle against imperialism and against feudalism. Why against feudalism? Because the feudal rulers were lackeys of British imperialism. And speaking in Hyderabad, we can clearly, there is no disguise about it. We all know who was the most loyal princely supporter of British rule. The Nizam of Hyderabad's richest man in India probably was the biggest feudal lackey of imperialism. And the Indian people were very clear that our struggle is against imperialism because imperialism is underdeveloping and subjugating our economy. And it is against the feudal lords, landlords and princes because they are perpetuating an agrarian policy which is ruining our agriculture. Okay? All the people today who are talking about nationalism, all the people at the top have never critiqued imperialism. Never. They never opposed imperialism. In all their writing, I cannot find a paragraph, not even one paragraph, critiquing imperialism and British rule and the content of its policies. Foreigner कहना बहुत आसान है और लोगों को confuse करना. Okay? That, have you ever heard from these platforms a word against imperialism in the last so many years? Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav you celebrate. Is there any critique of imperialism? No. It will not be because today also you are following the same policies. While you are in power, you are perpetuating an economic policy which is bringing back all the conditions, all the goals and objectives which the imperialist colonial policy was. It's just that, okay, technically we are free, technically we are independent, we are not hoisting the Union Jack, but you are giving over our markets, you even have legal clauses. Every international agreement has a legal clause, by and large, that if there is any dispute, it will be resolved according to the law of the country from where that company is registered, not by our laws. Almost all the international agreements have that clause. What are IMF and all doing? So what I'm saying is this notion of foreigner, it's a very misleading concept, because those who are invoking the category of foreigner today are referring to something else. And let me be very clear, they are referring to Muslim rule in India. Now, the Muslim rulers of India, I mean, rulers can have any religion, any religion. The Muslim rulers of India, I'm not talking about Muhammad Ghori or Mahmud Ghazni, etc. But the Muslim rulers of India were not taking wealth out of India and taking it to Samarkand or Central Asia. They were ruling here. Whatever money, tax, whatever was being generated was being spent in India. Okay? There is a difference between the foreign origins of certain people, and nobody in India, no historian of India, can ever say that only Muslims are foreigners. How do we know? There were the Huns, Shakas, Pahlavis, Kushans, any number of people. I mean, ancient history all across the world is full of migrations and movements of people. Full of migration and movement. Nobody in the world, except maybe some indigenous communities in America, they also, how much today, we don't know. So much intermixing. I mean, nobody can say, I am an original indigenous Indian and you are. I mean, I can fight with you, but it's a meaningless fight. It is a bogus fight. It is a misleading fight. Why we know, वो पार्लियामेंट में भी फॉरेन टैग लगा के किसको टारगेट करना चाहते हैं, वो उनका लड़ाई है, वो देश का लड़ाई नहीं, कभी भी नहीं था. फॉरेनर वाली लड़ाई कभी भी, फॉरेन imposed colonial rule is different from what these people are today presenting as foreigner in India. So let us be clear. The fight of the Indian people was against the policies of imperialism and feudalism, which is a very different category and very different struggle from what that narrow framework and a misleading framework which is sought to be brought in by a select group of historians who are being asked to do their job in a particular way. So that is the background of that struggle. Then, of course, 1920s, there's no point in my listing all the struggles. It won't be possible also. So 20s, of course, late 20s, we see massive economic struggles, massive. Number of work days lost goes up remarkably. The number of workers who come into unions, and I said new unions come up, the Gini Kamgar Union in Bombay, for instance. And from the 20s, you see the left communists being part of the trade union movement and adding a kind of militancy to the trade union struggle, which was not there earlier. Even though there were unions earlier, Madras, for instance, had the Madras Labour Union from 1918 onwards, Wadia and all. And of course, also Gandhi. Okay, there's no way we can talk about the trade union movement without, and the history of the working class without mentioning Mahatma Gandhi, because not only was he the overarching political leader of that time, but he was also, he had his own conception of trade union activity. Okay, you would have heard of the Mazdoor Mahajan Sabha and the Ahmedabad Textile Labor Association. Now, Gandhi's understanding of trade union movement is very different from what most of us see as the trade union movement. We can't dismiss it because this is Gandhi who has a lot of influence. And even in the national movement, we can't dismiss Gandhi in any way because he is seen as the leader of the Indian people. He is seen, he projects himself, the British government is forced to reckon. We can disagree, we can criticize, we can say this aspect we don't agree with, that aspect. But there is no way we can undermine. And I think for all students of history like me, understanding Gandhi remains a challenge. I'll tell you. I mean, I think for the left also, we've had EMS writing on Gandhi and Nehru because these are political figures who you can't understand through कि उन्होंने वहाँ ये कहा या ये किया. You know, they're complex because Indian society is also complex. Leading a movement across the Indian subcontinent in that period is not an easy job. Okay, building a mass movement which can be kept up and built, the tempo is raised every fresh round. It's not an easy job. All of us who do any kind of union activity, 3 दिन के हड़ताल में हम सोच रहे थे कल कैसे करें, कल क्या करें. You know, when I was a teacher, I can tell you, every morning I had to go to my college when Duta strike was on because every morning 2 new people would have been contacted by, you know, पीछे से जो and they would walk into the college and they would want to go and join, jaldi se sign kar do. Oh, वो सब चलता है. We all know that. Okay, but leading a big political movement of the Indian people is not a joke. This man managed it. Whatever we may say, we may disagree, but that's it. Okay. I mean, I'll give you another example. For instance, Gandhi's views on women. I mean, I have never been able to understand them. But I have met women, and very senior women, women who I respect, who would lay down their lives for Gandhi because he was such a leader. So, मतलब politics में there are certain dilemmas. In history also there are certain dilemmas. We should not undermine the challenge of understanding these personalities and these movements. These are very complex histories. But Gandhi's understanding on the trade union movement, it's as complex as his understanding on peasantry. I can tell you, when I was doing my MPhil, I think, one of the first papers I had to write was on the non-cooperation movement for my teacher, Professor Bipin Chandra. And I remember I studied the non-cooperation movement in UP, which is one of the largest states, even at that time, the United Provinces. Now, the workers began to organize in a huge way. This is the movement that ends with Chauri Chaura. Okay, this is the movement that I was studying in 1975. And I said, but this is very strange. Bardoli resolution, when the movement is withdrawn, it has 3 clauses, and the peasantry is up in arms against the British. And what is Gandhi saying? The landlords are our brothers. Our fight is not against the landlords. Now, as a young student who wants to be part of this big agrarian revolution in the Indian countryside in the 1970s, when you read this line, it foxes, it challenges you. What is Gandhi doing, you ask yourself. But what is the problem? Let us be clear. What is the problem for the peasantry? Peasantry pays rent. The tenant pays rent to the landlord. The British collects revenue from the landlord. Now, unless the peasantry pays the rent, the landlord cannot pay the revenue. The British do not deal with the tenants directly, they deal with the landlords. What is Gandhi saying? I mean, all of you have seen the popular version of Lagan and all that. तो वो तो लगान देता है. But जो मालिकाना हक है वो landlord का होता है. So the British collects, and the British were totally interested in land rights. I can tell you, when I was studying the history of Punjab, there are 7 micro-rolls, 7 volumes of microfilms by John Lawrence in his handwriting on the land rights of Punjab. 7 rolls of microfilms in John Lawrence's scrawling handwriting, which I had to sit and read in the National Archives to understand what the British thought of land rights. And on women, they are very clear. In the Royal Commission on Agriculture, there is one paragraph on women, only one paragraph. And it is very clear. It says women in India do not have rights in agricultural property. Now, if women don't have rights in agricultural properties, British are not interested in the women in agriculture. So 70% of India's women, and at that time I think 90% of India's women were in agriculture and in rural India. But the British are not interested in women in agriculture because they don't have property rights. वो तो property rights से deal करना. Now here is Gandhi. Similarly, in the trade union movement, what is Gandhi saying? Majur Mahajan Sabha का principle क्या है? You know it better. The principle is there is a concept of trusteeship between the owners and the workers. Now, you can say that yes, this is colonial India. The Sarabhais and that whole Ahmedabad industry is one of the few centers where Indian capitalists are coming up. Okay? Otherwise, industry in British India is owned by the British. Now, Gandhi is projecting a concept of trusteeship, saying the mill owner is so and so, but actually the mill belongs to the workers and it has to be managed, administered with the concept that the owner is the trustee and he is running it in the interest of the workers. Now, how much that actually works on the ground is a problem. Okay, it is a problem. But it's a concept and it is an alternate vision of trade union movement in India, which also throws up somebody like Ansuya Behan Sarabhai, who emerges as one of the few women, big women leaders, and who plays a role in Indian history, in Indian politics also. But the main bulk of trade union is the All India Trade Union Congress, and that in the 20s is very clearly tilting towards the left, not just left in terms of the CPI, but in terms of its ideology. Let us understand that 1917 October Revolution has already happened. The Russian Revolution was a big event. It is a big event which affects and impacts everyone. The fact that workers can create a state which is in their own interest, that has such a huge impact. It impacts even the trade union movement and workers of India. So that is the background in which in the 20s, of course, there's a little bit of struggle there with the Congress that intensifies in 30s. So 29, 30 is one phase and 31 is of course the 31, the salt satyagraha and the civil disobedience movement. There again the workers come out in a big way. And all of you may have heard about the Sholapur episode, the Sholapur commune as we call it, where 4 workers, even if you go to Sholapur, you will see this monument. Like in Delhi, there is this Teen Murti and Gyara Murti, but in Sholapur, there is this monument of the 4 martyrs. And let me see if I can get the names of the names are telling of the Sholapur commune. Unfortunately, okay, if I can get I'll just give you the name somewhere. They're there. Yes. I mean, I'm sorry I don't remember the names, but they are very important because they tell you about the unity of the working class. It's very, very clear what it tells us about the unity. In changing here, yes, it's, no, this is UP. Sholapur. Malapi Dhana Shetty, Shrikant Sharda, Kurban Hussain and Jagannath Shinde, who were hanged in January 31. These are the people. Now the names convey to you. Okay? anyone who's trying to tell us that one community is foreigners in India, but these foreigners, so-called in their language, have actually laid down their lives for India's freedom. And Sholapur Commune is a historic struggle because, you know, the British tried that the denotified tribals should come and break the strike. There's a big commune of denotified tribals in Sholapur. Who are now in Biri and all that, because the Sholapur textile industry is also in a crisis for a long time. But despite that, Sholapur declared a commune, they declared independence, and the British really, they had to impose martial law. I mean, you cannot imagine the kind of repression. And then these 4 were hanged, apart from others who were arrested, etc. So that's the background. But the late 20s, this is much more. And that's also a phase when Nehru is very particularly drawn to communism, socialist ideology. It is very clear that by the 20s, the working class has built links with the political movement. Not only links with the political movement, it has built a link of solidarity with the international workers' movement. It is drawn to the ideology of socialism. From the 1920s onwards, I think it is very clear that the ideology of socialism can never be taken out of the trade union movement. Whether you accept it or not, it is there. And not only that, as we say, it is symbolized in the red flag, in the imagination of workers. For instance, in Kanpur, I'll give you, in Kanpur in the 1930s, there was a very big strike. I mean, the textile industry, which was initially a British-owned industry, and then Indian owners came into textiles all across India. For instance, you look at the way the worker is expressing his aspiration. And he says, "Tamanna hai ki markar ho, kafan apna swadeshi ho, hamari maut se pehle watan apna swadeshi ho." Okay? I mean, this is a worker. Okay, I mean, your Golwalkars, your Savarkars, your Hedgewars did not say any of this. It is a worker in what is a phase called Lal Kanpur, when the workers were really sort of out on struggle in Kanpur. And there's Chitra Joshi's book on that, which has given great. So that is how you will find, and why I'm saying you should document. You might find, for instance, in your regional languages, in your local areas, this kind of writing, this kind of thought coming from the ground, you know, and which is much more expressive of the aspirations of the Indian people than anything that I can come and tell you from the top. No, that expression, that songs, the flags, the slogans, the posters they bring, those are much more. So that is the background in which, and then of course there was 37 is again a phase. You see, 37, you will know, the Indian British government had brought in several laws. First your Morley-Minter reforms and Montagu-Chelmsford, and then the 1935 Act, based on which provincial elections were held. And in many of the provinces, Congress governments were formed. And that is when the contradiction in the Congress begins to show up, because they are running the government. Abhi tak to bahut radical baat kar rahe the. But now when they are running the government, and we also have to understand that both the capitalist, Indian capitalist class and the Indian working class emerge at the same time. They emerge at the same time, they are in the same struggle to throw out the British. But the nature of how the capitalist and industrialist class expresses its demands, and they are putting pressure on the British government that you act on our behalf. The working class is asserting, because there's a fundamental contradiction. There's a fundamental contradiction even as both are fighting for the Indian nation. That complexity we have to understand. It is not simple. The working class is fighting for the freedom of the country and also trying to fight for its own rights, for its own demands. The capitalists are also supposedly in the fight for the freedom of the country, but their in their case, they are focusing on their demands and asking for concessions from the British. Okay? Now, the British are not neutral. The British try that when the working class begins to organize, पहले तो आप Indians के strike factory में strike करो. Leave the British industry. The nationalists are saying go strike in the British firms, don't strike in ours. So you understand this complicated situation. Each one is trying to defend its own interests. The British are happy to play each one against the other. And when nothing works, then what you do? So the most militant strikes are followed by the most worst communal riots. From 1920s, late 1920s onwards, you find Bhagat Singh, the bomb in the assembly, the execution of Bhagat Singh and his comrades. From that time, you see continuously communal riots are happening. Continuously. Every time there is a militant struggle, either riot karwa do. Now, all of us know how these things work. So each one is trying, and the same thing is being played at the international level during the Second World War. Okay? So before I come to the Second World War, let me just say that in the 1930s, this dilemma, you can say, if you want to be charitable to the Congress, if you want to be more critical, you can say the double standardness, two-facedness of the Congress, that while they are in power, they will not talk about the working class rights, they will be very repressive, but outside, from Bose to Nehru to everyone has been very militant as a leader of the working class. But as my friends who are historians have documented, once the Congress comes into power, while they are still very militant in their speeches in the non-Congress government regions, in the provinces, where they are in power, they are ambivalent. So this ambivalence, you can say, this two-facedness starts coming up the moment they become, they taste power and they see what may be coming as the freedom struggle. So even Nehru, he's in a dilemma. बाहर पहले किसान सभा भी बनाई प्रतापगढ़ में. अभी after all he has been president of the AIIEA. Okay, but now Congress government in power, Govind Bandar Pant and all in UP, what are they doing? It is in their power that you have all this Lal Kanpur that I was talking, where Ganesh Shankar Vidyarthi is martyred. All that is happening when they are in power. Okay, so this double-facedness, where you, after all, if you want to please the Indian industrialists, you have to make compromises and you cannot be conceding to the demands of the workers. Now, internationally also it is a complex situation once the war starts. The war is a good opportunity for Indian working class to come forward. Okay? Now, like the British were trying कि workers Indian factory में हड़ताल करें, Britishers की factory छोड़ दो. Indian capitalists are trying, British के में करो, हम तो nationalist है, हमारे factory में हड़ताल नहीं करो. British are trying another game at the international level. They're trying to have a pact with Hitler, saying go attack the Soviet Union because your problem also and our problem also will be solved if Soviet Union is finished. Okay, so they are, say, Stalin is also buying time because he has to industrialize Soviet Russia very fast in order to win this war. And ultimately, let us face it, it is Russia, it is socialist Russia which wins us the Second World War against Hitler. There is no doubt about it. Western media will never acknowledge it, but the biggest sacrifice, the biggest challenge to Hitler and fascism came from the socialist Soviet Republic of Russia. The Allies were constantly buying time, go attack Russia, तो एक बार में communism भी खत्म हो जाएगा और that was their game. Similarly, they were trying this game here. So that people's war, that time, it's a critical time. But of course, I think the most militant struggles, and even when Gandhi is attacked and arrested, the workers go on strike. There's any number. I mean, from the 1920s, the working class is out on the streets. They give a totally different color to the culture of cities. Bombay, Kanpur, these are working class cities. Even Delhi, when I was growing up, I can tell you. I mean, I lived very close to the Delhi cloth mills. Okay, big industry, but it was the workers who were around. The working class brought a certain culture to the city. It created an atmosphere against imperialism, against British rule in these cities. When I was growing up, and not only that, when we set up the All India Democratic Women's Association, there's a lot of talk about women's organizations, women's movement. I can say it as one of the founder members of the AIIEA in Delhi, I can say the strength of the women's movement in post-independent India in 1980s comes from the working class bastis, where the women came out and fought for their rights. Not from people like me, middle class can never lead, we can be facilitators, we can express, we can come and talk, but the strength comes from, and the women's movement in Delhi, I can certainly say, even in 1980s, it is built on the back of working class women in Delhi. All our early units were amongst working class women, of workers of DCM, Birla Mill, Swadeshi Cotton Mill. These are, Swadeshi Cotton Mill, of course, is in Kanpur, but AIIEA Textile. We had 7 textile mills in Delhi in the 1980s when I became an activist in the women's movement. And that is where the strength of our units came from. They are the ones who protested every time some issue happened. It's not, middle class, abhi to theek hai, phone pe sab agitation ho jata hai. Sara agitation phone pe. I attended a meeting in the UN and they said, we will do Facebook in this. I said, where are you living? I mean, where are the women of India? 67% of women in India, as per the 1911 census, still live in rural India. वो कितना Facebook करेंगे बाबा? थोड़ा सोचो ना. But the United Nations office, I'm sitting there and they're saying we will do this, we will do social media and all. Fine, I mean, I'm not against social media, but that's not where you can mobilize the women of India. So, but the big, coming back to this, the biggest challenge comes in the naval mutiny in Bombay in 1946. Quit India does not have so much impact, even though Quit India is a big movement across India. But the British are really shaken by the naval mutiny when the Bombay working class is just out on the streets defying every law. And men, women, everyone are out. I mean, we have heard directly from comrades Vimal Randeve, comrade AIIEA Rangnikar and all, because comrade AIIEA's sister, BTR's sister Kusum, got a bullet in Parel at the time of the Hartal for the 46 mutiny. And comrade AIIEA gave in detail in one of the interviews she gave to my friend Meera, which is published in the AIIEA bulletin of that, I think around 89, 90, it's published. She spoke about that whole and how this Hartal shook the British to the core. And as an aside, I'll give you a joke. When we were students, Comrade Major Jaipal Singh was the secretary of the Delhi Communist Party. And there was one very well-known journalist called C.P. Ramachandran. So he had been a naval commodore. He was in the naval mutiny. So one day he came to me and he said, I met your major, meaning Major Jaipal Singh. So I said, okay. He said, I told him, kuch nahi ho raha. If you had stayed in the army and I had stayed in the navy, at least hum coup to kar lete military ka. This is the kind of jokes you could, because one day he came and asked me, he said, you're young, will you see a revolution? I have to ask you. I don't think I will see a revolution anymore. He had been in the naval mutiny. Today, I have to ask people younger than me, will you see a revolution? Because what we are seeing today is the opposite. We are seeing the opposite. But what is possible in change? I'll just come to that last bit. There are lots of things I could have said, but I think today we are in a very peculiar situation. We are independent, yet every core value of our independence movement, our freedom struggle, stands challenged and threatened. Every core value. Democracy, you talked about civil liberties, civil rights, secularism, unity and peace, harmony, communal unity. These were core values. Those who never took part in the struggle for freedom cannot be expected to defend the core values. The economic development, the core of economic policies, self-reliant India. Okay? These are the core values. Why did we say economic development? Because we knew that the British had exploited us through those very economic policies. Today you bring them in the name of GATT, WTO, IMF, World Bank, whatever. You people, I'm sure, are seeing it every day in your lives. What these so-called economic policies, which of course, unfortunately, were brought in not by this government, they were brought in by the previous government. Another core value, which is against discrimination, for equality, against discrimination based on sex, religion, caste, gender, anything. Today, every bit of that is being violated. It is being violated. You have laws hanging on your heads which are striking at the very root of the concept of equal citizenship. Now, the point is, do we need another independence struggle? I can't say independence from who, but we certainly need independence from the kind of people who are undermining the gains of our freedom struggle every day. What is possible? What is possible also we need to think. I will, towards this end, I will talk about 2-3 things which you may find is very different. Ye kyun yahan aa raha hai? Not because I am a woman and I come from the women's movement, but I want to say, usually in the unions, of course, from 1980s, I have heard and interacted with the movement when Comrade EMS, BTR, all of MB, everyone was there. And they were very open about talking about many things. One of the things BTR used to say, and I think he said it in one of his written speeches also, it's there. I'll just draw attention to it. He said, we have comrades who are feudal masters in their homes. Huh? And he said it several times. I've heard him say it myself. Huh? He was very clear about these things. So, I'll tell you, when we started our women's organizations, our male comrade, आप घर आओ, उसको कुछ समझाओ. अरे बे, आप comrade हो, आप नहीं समझाओगे, हम जाके आपके घर में समझाएंगे. हाँ, आप comrade हो, दुनिया भर को समझाओगे, पर घर में जाने के लिए मुझे जाके समझाना होगा. Come on. Huh? Okay. Now, when we say feudal masters, it's not just about men and women. It's not only about patriarchy. You see, the Indian working class has come from all these castes, all these communities. हमारा जनेऊ भी साथ चलता है, चोटी भी साथ चलती है, टीका भी साथ चलता है, सब कुछ साथ चलता है. I'm talking about the majority community, but there are other similar points of discrimination in all communities. All communities, okay? And the working class is drawn from all this. All of us believed, at least in the 70s and 80s, that the unity of the working class and the working people of India will sort of do away with all these divisions. Unfortunately, it's not happening. It's not happening. It is a challenge, I think, to us in our daily lives. I'm sure it is a challenge in your organizations. What I'm saying is today we have to recognize the differences and try to build that unity based on that recognition. You see, I can say it from my own experience. In the 70s and 80s, we would never talk about caste because we thought it was backward to talk about caste. We were radical, we were progressive. We thought we were leaving caste behind. But unfortunately, it's not happening. We, as a scholar of women's studies, we did studies. I studied migration in 22 states of India, I can tell you. I went to almost all the states. And some 145 villages I went to. 45 villages, we did actual village studies. But sitting in Delhi, I can tell you, if I study the domestic workers, the maids who come to homes, caste prevails in every home of India. Every home of India. I may not believe in it, but other women in my own home believe in it. In our own homes, we believe in it. Peaceful coexistence के नाम पे बहुत कुछ चलता है ना? बहुत कुछ चलता है. We overlook. But the fact is, it is there in the data. If you look at the study of domestic workers at CWDS, where I was working, did for any number of studies we did, who are the women in the most menial jobs? What are the jobs women get, and who are the women in the most menial? Caste, we used to think caste to village में छूट जाता है, वो साथ चलता है, वो विदेश में भी जाता है. Now we are getting studies of caste in Google and Microsoft and in all the American NRI communities. It's clear. We have to, there is an elephant in the room, as we say. It's there. We have to handle it. So it is better we recognize. We recognize that there is discrimination in our society. There is inequality in our society. It is inequality of wealth. It is inequality of social status. It is inequality of gender. It is inequality based on caste, religion, region. So Northeasterners and Northeastern girls in Delhi are heckled. I mean, they're really treated badly at times. If we want to build a strong working class movement today, the idea of India is about equality, about democracy. We cannot say we will not think about this. And it is not as if our movement is weakened by recognizing these differences. Our movement will be strengthened if we recognize that there is prevailing inequality in society. We thought we could build a movement based on our interaction in our office formal spaces. The fact is, all of us Indians, whether it is the Karnataka hijab round, okay? Now hijab to dikh raha hai, pagdi nahi dikh raha hai Sikhon ki. After all, the Sikh pagdi is also going into the examination room. So only the hijab is visible. If Government of India and if the Indian Supreme Court has to take notice, it has to take notice of everything. I can go with my tika tomorrow. And I don't come from the south, so I can't still distinguish between Iyer, Iyengar and all that. But I'm told that all the tikas are very clear about which. So I carry my caste into my office space. I carry my religion into the office space. If I don't, I'm asked questions. Why don't you put a bindi? Why don't you have your mang? I mean, I'm asked questions. All through my working life, I've answered these questions in my college teaching also. Indu, you're married. Acha, you don't put this. That's my personal decision. But I'm asked. My students would ask me, ma'am, kal karwa chauth hai, aap to padhayenge nahi na? Kyun? Kyun nahi padhay? Then they said, acha ma'am, aap vrat rakhenge. I said, what's your problem? You're my students. Then they came into the staff room. I was having tea. So they said, ma'am, aapne to vrat, as if unko crisis ho raha hai ki maine vrat nahi rakha. Huh? And I'll tell you what Comrade AIIEA told me. She said, those people say, Mangal Sutra nahi pehante ho, your husband will die. She said, my husband is there, very much there. I have never worn a Mangalsutra. You know, what I'm saying is these debates have to happen. They have to happen. It is better to confront them rather than think carpet के नीचे डाल देंगे तो नहीं हो रहा है, हो ही नहीं रहा है. But how identity is to be tackled? Why are we talking about it? Because ultimately, freedom was not only about foreign rule, as I say. It was about a modern India with modern values, with modern goals and objectives, with modern commitments. If we are going to carry all our irrational ideas, Pansare ko, Dhabolkar ko, sabko khatam kar denge, who sort of uphold rational ideas. So in the working class and amongst the working people of India, these struggles have, how we conduct them, we know it's very difficult. एक दिन का हड़ताल करने में कितना जान निकलती है, तो ये struggles, but ultimately the freedom struggle came along with social reform. Those who are opposed to social reform in India can never be freedom fighters. They cannot be, because the whole struggle is about building a modern India. And modern India means what are the values you're going to rest it on? What are the values you're going to build it on? As I said, when BTR used to say, by feudal master in the house, to nahi chalega na. Modern values, you have to, if you embrace modern values, you, unfortunately, the home king, the new meaning that is being sought to be given to concepts of freedom, concepts of opposing foreign rule, so-called, total disaster happening. It's a very conscious agenda. And when I say you have to write your history, why am I saying? Because they are writing, मतलब उल्टा history लिख रहे हैं, उल्टा लिख रहे हैं, स्कूलों में भी पढ़ाएंगे. We have to oppose it. We have to oppose it because it is striking at the roots of democracy. It is striking at the roots of everything that the working class in India has laid down its lives for. And in that, from what I hear, in the CITU, for instance, over the last many years, 40% of its membership is coming from women, and from women in Anganwadi, Asha, etc., where there is no formal work. You know, we are used to, there's an office, there's a formal public sector, we will organize, all that. But this is a new working class. It's gender is also different, and there are many genders. Let us not think that it will weaken our struggle. You know, sometimes we tend to think, how will we? But there is a history, an earlier history from the freedom struggle. For instance, in the choir workers, which were always an informal, unorganized sort of area of work in Kerala. The choir workers of Kerala, and these were primarily women, gave a new militant edge to the left movement in Kerala, and they threw up new forms of organization. So there are interviews with women workers from Kerala, which Meera Velayudhan did. And incidentally, Meera is the daughter of the only Dalit woman member of the Indian Constituent Assembly, Dakshayani Velayudhan. And the choir workers, women who struggled in these unions, have talked about the new forms. You know, when women who come from these different streams of organizations and organization of work, nature of production is different. Nature of production is very different from the modern industrial production that we are used to when we think of a factory and all. But there is scope for developing new forms of organization and new forms of struggle. Similarly, when women come into the struggle, our experience is it takes a lot to bring women into the struggle. But when they come in, they come with a new kind of militancy because they have to counter so much in the house that when they come, they bring a lot of militancy to it because, you know, they have already had to face a lot of social discrimination to be able to. And it is not something new. I was looking at an English translation of a biography of Parvati Bai Bhor, who is a Marathi trade unionist from the CPI, the United CPI at that time. She's a colleague and comrade of Ushatai Dange. And then she writes, she says, in her house, when she goes out for these activities, there is tremendous opposition. Why are you going? What are you going to get out of it? Why should you be involved in you? And one day she goes for, a worker has died, and this funeral of this Shankar, who's a worker. And her husband wants to, really, he says, who was Shankar to you? We all know how women face this, And she says, he was my comrade. He laid down his life for this country, and anyone who lays down his life for this country is my brother, and I will go first. Understand? And she's from a working class background, is trade unionist. Her autobiography is in Marathi, so I have only read parts of it in translation, which Comrade Pandey's granddaughter Sonali made for me. So. Similarly, Papa Umanath, you would have all heard of. Some of you have seen her. Papa's mother used to run, she was widowed, I think, and her mother. And she used to run the trade union, the office canteen in Golden Rocks Union at Trichurapalli. And she gets involved in the worker struggles, obviously. And she says in the... I did not eat food from other people because caste, But she says that in the union-based activities, we learned to overcome that. Then she said the factory did not give a holiday for Eid or for the religious festivals of the Muslim. So we used to allow कि उनको नमाज पढ़ना है, तो हम एक शील्ड बना देते थे फैक्ट्री में कि वो नमाज भी पढ़ ले. Because it was a major festival, but they were not being given leave. Then Papa's mother is arrested in one of the big strikes and struggles in the Golden Rocks Union, Railways Union. She's arrested. She dies in jail. She's one of the first few women in independent India, political sort of prisoner death in jail. And Papa, who was, I think, some 13 years old at that time, is called by the British, this is Indian authorities, and they said, you have to pledge that you will not participate in these activities. Then you can take your mother's body. Now, Papa, who's a young teenage girl at that time, she thinks it's her mother's body. And she's thinking, what do I do? Then she says, no, my mother gave up her life for this struggle. If I compromise and pledge that I will not indulge in, I will be betraying my mother. She says, no, you do what you like with the body. I will not give a pledge. What I'm saying is, we always think big people, sacrifice, unka to freedom fighters pension bhi hoga, sab kuch hoga. It is the working classes of India, the peasantry and the workers of India who have made the maximum sacrifice for this struggle. And I think even in this fresh struggle that we are facing against policies which are pro-imperialism, globalization, liberal, these are all policies. I am very clear, this is the new phase of imperialism. New face and new phase. And all we are being told to do is, okay, produce for this international market. The international market will never be now. We are more exposed to the fluctuations, etc., on their terms. And just as, when capitalism is in crisis, as a student of history, we study about fascism. Okay, I have studied fascism as a student of history in my BA, MA, etc. And one of the first principles we read about fascism is that when capitalism is in crisis, monopoly capitalism to assert itself, fascism is the face of monopoly capitalist assertion in a moment of crisis. If that is what fascism is, and if Nazism in German fascism was a face of that, I think the kind of Hindutva fundamentalism that we are seeing, It is the modern face of fascism in a crisis-ridden capitalist society of India, which is under pressure from imperialism to enact its policies. It is a new face. Just as Nazism was the face of fascism and of assertion of monopoly capital in Germany, I think that is what we are facing. So this is not just ordinary Hindu-Muslim jhagda kara dena. This is a conscious ideological attack and onslaught on the working people of India. If we do not recognize the nature of that attack, the depth of that crisis, I think we will be failing in our job as a student and teacher of history who understands and interprets historical phenomena to explain to my students, discussing with you today. But you as trade unionists, we will be failing in our developing our understanding of what is going on. It is not about one leader. Okay, that one leader may be one thing, but it is about an assertion of the new face of monopoly capitalism, as my comrade Sitaram would say, crony capitalism, whatever. But this is a strategy of capitalism, and a strategy of capitalism under pressure from international capital to engage with the people in such a manner as to scatter and demolish and sort of deconstruct the rich history of united struggle that has been built up. And in this struggle, if we do not recognize the challenges, which includes understanding these depths and these layers of inequality which persist in our society, I think we will be failing. We will be failing not just in terms of our ideological commitments, but the fact that it is an ideological struggle, it is a political struggle, it is also a social struggle. It is a social struggle because it will affect the lives of the people, of women particularly. We are seeing that every day. Because when you produce what some historians have called a lumpen proletariat, the culture that we used to see in working class cities, that culture is also demolished. The capacity of the working class to pose an alternative progressive culture, that is also being attacked today. So how will you counter this market fundamentalism? How will you counter the culture that the market is bringing, where women are targeted, Dalit women are targeted in very particular ways, but all women, I mean, your commodities, it's a market. The working class, the working people, and the working class organizations, trade unions, have to enter this struggle afresh with new ideas to face the new challenges. It's not easy, I know it. I mean, at my age, all I can say is I look for hope. Every morning, I hope something new will come up, something different will come up. The people of India will teach the ruling classes of India and the international capital a fresh lesson, just as we did at the time of the freedom struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Dr. Professor Agnihotri. The response from you speaks about how brilliantly she presented the very important, relevant subject to all of us, that's the working class, and how, as a contemporary period, the contemporary time, how we have to look at it. We've been told around more than 1,000 have watched this program across the country, and I'm sure that certain questions may also have been thrown at us. But ultimately, as rightly pointed out by Professor Agnihotri, she told the unity is the secret of the working class today. If at all you think like that, unless and until we unite and fight against the social, ideological, and political order, there cannot be a future for the working class. How brilliantly the working class has played its role during independence struggle. And she also very cleverly posed whether are we in second independence struggle? Perhaps we may, I'm thinking. So, comrades, we are very thankful to her for her brilliant presentation. We will be almost 93 minutes. She presented this wonderful topic to us, and there may be some questions in our minds uh, which may require some clarification. So we will take the questions, but before that, you can also get freshen yourself and come back, because this is the modern India and we are the organized sector. There's a break always required. So we'll take a break for half an hour for tea break and reassemble. And meanwhile, you can also write your questions and pass it on to us so that we can take the benefit of Dr. Agnihotri when he in a presentation of the working class, and today what's the role of the working class. Please come back. Now it's 12:22. We'll be here by sharp 1 o'clock, and the question answer session will be for half an hour. Then we'll be breaking for lunch. Please cooperate. Thank you, comrades. Washrooms are also available in the first floor. Top and the first floor. Where is the tea served? Tea served in the second floor. In top floor, fourth floor, top floor. Thank you.
Questions will be given in writing.
Yeah, writing, give it. No? If somebody wants to answer, they can give it and go, so that we will have a little time if some questions come. Anil, you have cut off that, no? Anil?
We break.
Getting ready. Yeah. That comment is standing on, you can take it chair. Rashekar.
మేడం మీరు ఇద్దరు అటే కూర్చోండి ఇక్కడ మనం కొంచెం ఇక్కడ ఉండి ఆర్గనైజ్